Good afternoon, it's Joyful Hermit. I'm dedicating this video to a young woman that I've been made aware of, and she represents many women and men, young men, many young women, many young men, and even older women who have been abuse victims, who have been particularly sexually assaulted, especially taken advantage of, deceived, seduced by those who are in employment or positions or vocations of great trust and holiness even, or those who are meant to protect us. Can be parents, can be police, it can be men of the clergy, employers, so relatives, things like that, good family friends. But particularly, like in this case, it was someone who was raped by a couple of policemen, a young woman who went to a large city, I think for a job or something like that, and a new job, young and out starting her life, and of others, so many that we have heard of and some of us know, or some of us have been taken advantage of also by people we trusted, people who seduced, deceived, took advantage of. Once they had gained our respect or had us in some kind of even a type of emotional blackmail situation even, or a type of being able to hold something over us and take advantage that way. So this is the story of Mary of Edessa, and some think it's legend, others think it's true. And I actually had Mary of Edessa for quite a while confused with Saint Mary of Egypt. This other woman, Saint Mary, is a saint, Saint Mary of Edessa, and Saint Mary of Egypt, but they're two different women, but around the same time period. And some think that Mary of Egypt is just legend, not true. I happen to feel that they were both women who lived and had their life stories that remained. Word of mouth, because that was how it was done in the early centuries, that we were an oral society where people would, they didn't have the books, or they didn't have written accounts, or not much. They had scrolls and things, but not for the general public. How the news spread and how the stories remained and the biographies of real life people were passed down from those, and some people were particularly gifted in story. They were storytellers. They were the ones who would repeat the histories of the people, the news of the times, and the biographies of great people. It was all done word of mouth, and they had it to a level of perfection where even down to the words would be repeated exactly as they had been told by the persons the generation before them. So it was it was like a written book, but it was done orally. So I think we can trust these accounts. This one I'm going to share, and I'm doing it in honor and as a prayer for a particular young woman who was indeed raped by police, a couple of police, and suffered greatly from it, obviously, was traumatized, horribly traumatized. And such events affect the family of the person also. And so let this be a prayer for that woman and for many other women who have been taken advantage of by those in authority, those who they thought they could trust, be it a school teacher that they thought they could trust, or a coach, or a priest, or a minister, or a youth director. It's becoming rather commonplace in our times. It's in the news nearly daily, someone else. And it's rampant. I shouldn't say rampant. It is become familiar in families. Often, a father molesting a daughter, or a son also, or increasingly women, same sex, boys who are trafficked, girls who are trafficked, or sold into prostitution by their own mothers or fathers, or uncles, or whatever. So, this was back in the 3rd century. The account was found in a writings called The Life of Abraham and The Life of Saint Mary of Edessa, Edessa, or also known as Saint Mary the Harlot. What is included in The Life of Abraham, and they're not quite sure who wrote it, but Ephraim, the deacon of Edessa, is most often considered to be the author of it. And so this is from a Syriac manuscript that was extracted from 5th or 6th century. It was extracted from that manuscript, found in the 5th, or dated back to the 5th or 6th century. But I looked up Ephraim, Saint Ephraim of Edessa. Ephraim, he's also known as Ephraim the Syrian. And I want to talk a little bit about him first. He's the one who they think wrote this or passed this on down. He would have passed it down verbally, and also probably wrote it. He had many talents. He ended up becoming a deacon, but he also was he was against Arianism. Arianism was a heresy that said that Jesus was born a man, but had divine attributes or instincts, or part of his thinking and life was divine, but he was mainly a man with just overlays of holy, of divine. Whereas, of course, Jesus is human and divine, both. But the Arians felt and propagated this heresy that Jesus was human with a little bit of divine sprinkled in, basically. So Ephraim did a lot of writing, a lot of speaking against Arianism. He is also known as the saint of daily living. So he was very practical. A lot of his preaching had to do with how to live your everyday life in a holy but practical way. So he would be very popular in our times with that. He also was called, let me find it here, the harp of the Holy Spirit. Ephraim, as a talented poet and hymnographer, introduced hymns and singing in public worship back in the 3rd century. He was born in 306 in near the Syrian border. And his father was a pagan priest who converted to Christianity, and his mother then also. I'm sorry, I've been having, I don't know if it's air conditioning or some kind of allergy or something, but I can't get my throat cleared lately, and I haven't spoken much at all. So I find I speak less and less and less. Even at the dog park, I was mentioning in a comment to someone that I rarely have anyone, either no one comes or somebody comes, but they're busy talking with other people. And that's okay by me. I'm a hermit. They don't know it. But hermits are not disallowed from speaking by any means. They're to be hospitable and blend in. But anyway, I've got this frog in my throat. So we'll just pretend that's how I always talk, and maybe it'll be the way I'm going to talk. Who knows from here on. So Ephraim fled as a refugee to Edessa. There were terrible times going on where he was born. So he fled to Edessa, and he lived in a small cave up in the mountains, in the hills. And he lived and died there. He died in 373. There are over 400 hymns still existing. Extant, it's called. If something's still around, it's called extant. E-X-T-A-N-T. So there's 400 of his hymns yet today. He was a deacon, a poet. As I mentioned, he was a hymnographer. He wrote hymns. He was a theologian. He was a biblical exegist, meaning he studied Scripture and was able to explain it, studiously explain it, exactly explain it, accurately. And he also wrote sermons in verse. So that would have been interesting to hear him, to hear one of his sermons. I'm sure some are extant also. I know they are. I think I've seen some. But they're written in verse, as poetry. And he's very talented and a beautiful soul, very holy. See what else I have. My little notes, look at that. It's just scribble. But, he's a patron saint of spiritual directors and the spiritual life. He's the only Syrian person who's born from Syria who is a doctor of the church. So let's see if there's anything else. Let's see. No, I think he is considered, though, by many to be the author of the life of Saint Abraham, who was born in the early 3rd century, early 300s. And Abraham had a niece, and that will be the main part of this, of my video today, is going to be on what happened with Saint Mary of Edessa. And it would make sense that Ephraim, who lived in Edessa partway through his life, until the end of his life, he lived there and ended up being a hermit there, and probably where he did most of his writing and his preaching as a deacon. So, I think if I have time at the end, I'll read the prayer, St. Ephraim's prayer. But we'll get right into the life of Abraham, and more so of Saint Mary the Harlot. And it's sad that she's called that when you find out what happened to her. It's sad. So Abraham, as I said, was born in the early 300s. And he, as well as Ephraim, I think why Ephraim was drawn to writing about his life is that they both gave up their hermitages at a certain point in their lives, later on in life, left their hermitages for a good reason, good causes, and then went back to their hermitages to live out their lives and to die as hermits. So they returned shortly before death. Ephraim felt compelled, and many writers in earlier times, even up through Saint Therese the Little Flower, Saint Therese of Lisieux, they would also always write in their prologue something about how they wrote because they were under authority to write, or they were under obedience to write, that Mother Superior had asked them to write, or their abbot had told them they must write, or some other authority figure. But with Ephraim, he was compelled to write out of humility and as a way to show others that we should be humble and compelled in our holiness in later life, in our later years especially, also to never give up on humility and on the compunction of moral rightness. So it was very common for saints and ascetics to give reasons why they were doing something. And I've had people off and on leave comments, some early on, like, it's terrible. If you're a hermit, you shouldn't be doing these videos. Well, they don't know about hermits, that hermits were always hospitable. If anyone came to their cave or their hut, they would let them in. And some would come for a while, wanting to learn about the hermit life or wanting to have spiritual direction from some hermit. And the hermit wouldn't turn them away. And hermits left writings. Many of them wrote. That's how we know so much about the hermit life. Or like Ephraim wrote, and Macarius, Saint Macarius, left many writings. Many of the desert fathers and mothers left writings. And on through the ages, on through the centuries, they wrote. Carthusians wrote. They wouldn't sign their names. If they had been dead, I think it was 400 years or something, then their names would be ascribed to what they wrote. After they had been dead 400 years, their actual name could be put on the writings. But up until that time, they would just sign it A. Carthusian, leave it very anonymous. And many of their writers never did put their names. Somebody reminded me, I think it's the Cloud of Unknowing. It's anonymous, but they've pretty much figured out, I think, someone who they think wrote it. And there were a couple of other books that are classics that are in that same mode. The person, out of humility, did not leave their name, his or her name. And anything I've had published, articles, I used a pen name for it, or didn't want any name at all used. There's been a couple of magazines that I had to use my name. They wouldn't do it any other way, and they wanted to publish what I had written, just articles, no big deal. But people, would ask me, and I would start to cave and think, well, I need to give a reason why I'm doing this, why I'm doing videos, or why I was writing a blog, or I have lots of blogs that I wrote anonymously, or under my Joyful Hermit moniker. But I don't think we should need to do that. It's no big deal of why we are sharing our spiritual journeys, or what God has done with us in our lives, how God has taught us, or what we've done wrong, what our sins are, what our failings are. And I realized just recently, in the last few days, more of the purpose of this my videos is sharing my spiritual life pretty much as I did with my blogs. One step at a time, up the mountain, climbing the mountain of life, climbing the stairway to heaven, I hope. And so it's in real time. And when I make errors, or I am, like I had been in a very bad dark night of the soul, or of the spirit, or, well, it was probably the senses. Few have dark nights of the spirit. And I'm not there. I'm not at that level. But it was a dark night of the senses. And I was very down. And I had to discern, was I depressed? Was I depressed? Should I get antidepressants or something? Or was it demonic? Was it, somebody mentioned, well, maybe I'm cursed. Another person had thought that I was demonically oppressed. Last fall, a friend of mine thought that. And I thought, oh no, I'm not. I, pray and read scriptures and all. But then I just last night found some of Father Gabriel Amorth's writings online, thanks to another viewer who found some of his writings online. And I read about what he wrote about the oppressed, demonically oppressed. And my life would be that. The many things that have gone wrong or have been evil or bad has happened to me. So that could be. Or I have had opportunities and people who would have cursed me. So it could be that. But also the Holy Spirit, I think, I have to discern these things. When I was praying, asking deliverance from any curses that I've had in life, asking God to remove them, protect me from any further curses. But I heard a voice say, but you are a victim soul. So my life also could be that, a victim soul. Job, the book of Job, is an example of the penultimate victim soul. He had everything happen to him. He suffered everything conceivable, including dark night of the senses and dark night of the spirit, as John of the Cross calls that. So anyway, Ephraim and Abraham both had similarities in these aspects of even Ephraim writing Abraham's story, Abraham's account. So Ephraim did give a reason why he was compelled to write. And I've decided I don't need to justify why a hermit would be sharing. It's something that I felt God wanted me to do. I had been praying for what is my mission in life? What do you want of me, Lord? And this came to me to try doing videos. And I had done some years ago, 9 or 10 or 12 years, or even longer than that. I think I did some back maybe in 2008, 2009. So it's a form of sharing my spiritual journey, and for whatever good anyone could get from it. Now, hermits of yore did their writing or shared, it was passed down by person to person, usually after they were dead. Then their writings would be found, or the sharing went on while they were alive. That's how people knew about them, and people would come wanting to get to talk with them or to ask questions or such as that. But I don't really see a reason to have this kind of maybe a forced humility or justification. Oh, my spiritual director told me to do this or ordered me. I'm under obedience to share my life or to write my blog. I did have my spiritual director. He said, yes, you must write it. And the rector said, yes, he even told me to call it a Catholic hermit. So I had that justification if I needed it. But at this point, I realize it's sort of silly in a way. Shouldn't have to be justified for trying to do something that is going to hopefully help other people with their spiritual lives, evangelize, or share my flaws. You can see my flaws, and then you can say, well, I don't want to do as she did then. So that's also good. Anyway, for whatever it's worth. So in the prologue, I'm going to assume Ephraim did write this. He writes explaining why he's writing this account of Mary. It's an extract taken out of the life of Abraham, who was her uncle. But why is he writing about Mary and what happened to her? Well, he says it's as a way of being a lesson to all of us, and especially in our older years, to continue on always being humble and doing the right thing, holding up morality and the compunction of doing right, keeping right from wrong. So Abraham had, he got into some of the life of Abraham. Let me find that section. Well, Abraham was going to be married. And the wedding was all set and everything. Suddenly, he told his bride, I don't want to get married. He realized he was not to be married. He wanted to be a hermit. He wanted to be close to God, to give himself to God. So he fled. He went out from the city where it was Edessa, where he was going to be married, and put himself into a cell. There was an area on the edge of Edessa, out more in the wilderness part, where he was, where there were different cells. Different hermits were out there. And he built one that he literally bricked himself in. He had one little window, one little opening, not even really a window, just an opening, where people could put food through, communion, and he could talk back and forth through that. But he never left, not for years. And he obviously didn't marry. So I'm trying to, let me find it here, how many years he was there. And he had a brother who died, and his wife died also, and they had a little girl who was left orphaned. Her name was Mary, and she lived in Edessa. So her parents did. And so family and relatives knew, or not family, Abraham was the family, friends knew that Abraham was her uncle. And there were no other people, no other relatives. So they took Mary out to Abraham, out to his cell, and said, what's happened? Your brother and his wife have died, and here's their little girl. And so Abraham had, where they lived, he had an inner cell that he had bricked himself into. But there also was an outer room, an outer cell, that had a door to it and everything. You could come and go. And it's sort of like what anchorites in the Middle Ages and anchoresses had. Often they would have one cell that they were totally walled into, with a window to the church. They were walled up against the church if they could be. And then a window out to the world, and there would be a room added on that where a maidservant would live, or a manservant who would bring, usually it was just the women that would have the extra, where they would bring the food or attend the person if they were sick. They could hand medicines over through the window or the opening. So there was this added outer cell, outer room with a door to it that people could, person could go in and out. And so that's where Mary lived, his little niece. And he taught her through the little opening. He taught her the Psalms, the Psalter. He taught her to memorize all the Psalms. And he taught her the ascetic life, and the virtues, all the virtues, and how to live a life of asceticism, of great simplicity and detachment from the world, not to be attached to the temporal world or to vanity and fineries and fame and attachments to money and all of that. And as it turns out, his brother had been very well off. But to protect Mary from becoming attached to the world when she was older, he gave away all the money to the poor, because the friends, let him know you have all this money, and he had them give it away to the poor, because he took care of Mary through his own means of existing very simply, and other people then would come and bring food for both of them. So they lived like that for 20 years. Mary was 20 years old and very beautiful and very holy. So there was a monk who would come now and then to get to have spiritual talk with Abraham. And, I wanted to mention this. After so many years, Abraham became very, very holy himself. And this is one time, there were 2 times he did leave his cell. The one time was when the bishop insisted that he become a priest. The bishop wanted to ordain him as a priest because his reputation was very widespread of how holy he was. So Abraham became a priest. And so this monk would come for some spiritual direction and conversation, and had become a spiritual friend or counterpart to Abraham, who is Saint Abraham, but also was a priest in his time. So there was Mary, and this monk started noticing Mary. And as it is said in Ephraim's account, he worded it that he was a monk in profession only. In other words, he never really had a call from God to be a monk. Obviously not, based on what happened. It took the monk about a year of visiting, of when Mary became at an age where this monk, lust just came out of him when he would see Mary. And remember, she wasn't walled in. She was free to come and go. But she didn't. She was very holy, as was her uncle. So, but this monk seduced her over time, gradually. Flirted with her, complimented her, broke her down. And finally he raped her. And even though she realized she had weakened to this man, but she trusted him. He was a monk. He was a friend, a spiritual friend of her holy uncle. So it was really a horrible thing. She hadn't intended to lose her virginity ever. And he just worked on her. And then got her to a position where she agreed to come out of the cell, and he raped her. So that's the connection. That's why I am going to also be praying and asking Mary of Egypt also, but Mary of Edessa, to intercede for this woman, this young woman who was raped by police, and any woman who was raped by them, or boys, or raped by clergy of any type of church, or teachers, anyone in authority. That's what I'm praying for them now, and asking Saint Mary to help them. But so that's what happened to Saint Mary of Edessa. And she was so horrified and so traumatized by what had happened, and blamed herself also, though, for leaving that cell, leaving the protection of her uncle. And she was naive. Her uncle had no experience in rearing a child. He had never married even. He was just a young man when he went into this austere hermit life, anchorite life. And he didn't think to teach her of even the facts of life, or the wiles and wickedness of evil, of how men can tempt. He had no idea his spiritual friend was seducing her subtly, breaking her down, but getting her to trust in him, and to, I'm your friend, and think of him as holy and trust him because he's holy. He was a monk. And monks, of course, aren't to be having relations with women, and definitely not raping or seducing women. So she was traumatized and horrified that she had trusted this man, this monk. And she was horrified also because her uncle had taught her everything, had taken care of her, had become her parent, and she had let him down. He didn't know even what happened, but she knew. And he didn't realize that she had left even. So she did leave. She went back into Edessa. And she was so broken and so upset and traumatized that by what had happened to her. and blamed herself. Probably this monk even laid it on her. Well, you didn't resist enough, or you should have done something, or you should have screamed, or told your uncle, or not come out of your cell. It's your fault. It's amazing what people who rape people or take advantage will do. Will blame you for what they did to you. So I know from experience myself how that has happened many times. So not with rapes, but once with a rape, but otherwise other situations of breaking my strength, or getting lulled into even a lesser standard of spiritual life. You shouldn't be doing that. That's, be balanced, and all of that. And you can be balanced and still follow Christ. Trust me. But people will try that on you. They'll try it. Because, it won't hurt to go do this or do that. And I do it to myself at times too. You can start thinking, well, maybe if I were more this or that way, this situation wouldn't have happened, or people wouldn't find me a little different or anything like that. So it's the devil. Don't fall for it. So Mary left, went to Edessa, and soon found out, and she felt she was defiled. She felt broken, and soon, had to make her way in life. And the women in that circumstance, in those time periods, in the 300s, would turn to prostitution as a means of making a living. Women weren't hired to do work back then. Women were either married or they became hermits, and not many were hermits. So they were either married or lived at home, took care of the aging parents, were spinsters. So they couldn't go out and get a job working in the store or in the factory or as school teachers or anything like that. So she became a prostitute. And the more she sunk, the more traumatized she became, and the farther from God and all that she had learned and all of her holiness. And she was 20, I think she was 25 by then. Abraham, of course, realized his niece had left, because she was free to come and go. She wasn't enclosed like him. And she would do that, but never for any length of time. And there are two different accounts, but the one that Ephraim writes, Saint Ephraim the Syrian writes, was that Abraham found out from two dreams that he had. And the dreams were 2 years apart. I think 2 years apart. Anyway, there's 2 years involved. And there were two dreams. And the first one was of a dragon and a dove. And in that one, the dragon consumed the dove whole. Just ate the dove whole. Intact but whole. And in the second dream, the dragon returned and had been in some kind of a battle, and his gut was split open. And in that dream, then, Abraham could see the dove was still in there and was still intact, but had been devoured. And Abraham had many gifts, and one of them was discernment, and he could do dream interpretation. So he knew that the dragon was the devil, and that the dove was his beautiful niece, his pure and lovely holy niece, Mary. And he resolved then to go out and find her. But he waited a while longer, hoping she would return, hoping and praying she would return. But he was devastated. He knew somehow that the devil had gotten her. So I think it was after 5 years. So she was 25. He went out seeking her. He dressed himself as a soldier so he would not be noticed by people, or they wouldn't recognize him as a hermit and or as a holy person. And he was so well known, Abraham was, as this holy man and a priest, that he didn't want to be known, because his mission was secretive, in that he needed to find his niece and didn't want her to run or flee or find out that he was looking for her either. So he got some tips as to where she was, and he found her in a I don't know, like a brothel, or it wasn't it was just she was mostly on the streets, but there would be taverns that would, didn't even call them taverns back then. Inns they were called. And the men would take the women to the inn and get a room, like in today's society. Except now it's just about anywhere they will take them. And many of them don't live past the experience either, in some cases. So, and I'm sure back then too, there were crazy people back then too, evil, who would have murdered these women after they raped them or had sex with them. They didn't want to pay. So he found that she was in this inn, had a room there, or no, she was in the inn, and he, or outside of it or something. Sorry, my story isn't straight. I tell you, my own voice is distracting me. Sorry about that. I just spilled. Okay, so he went up to her, but kept sort of a distance, because he even rubbed some other scents on him, because he knew she was so holy, she would perceive that was her uncle, even by his scent, his physical temporal scent, but also his holy essence. So that's why he kept a little bit of a distance, but talked with her and got her confidence that he was a soldier, and he even acted as if he wanted to hire her for sex. So finally she agreed. They went up to a room, and imagine what this did to him to have to do this. But it was the only way he knew to try to get access to her, to speak to her. So they were in this room, and it was when they were in the room, and she went up closer to him, figuring, she had to earn her money. This is what he wanted. This man wanted, this soldier. And she recognized it was her uncle. And she was just petrified and in shock, and just wept and wept. And but it took him all night talking with her, and he wept and he prayed and begged her to come back home with him, come back to their cells out in this area where there were other hermits. And it took all night, but she finally agreed, and the reason she wasn't going to was that she was so reduced that she felt unforgiven and unforgivable. And she felt as if there was no hope for her, that she had been blamed herself still, that she shouldn't have been so duped, so naive about this monk who reduced her and seduced her over a year's period of time, and then raped, got her to come out with him back out into the world more, into Edessa, and raped her. So it's just horrible when I think of these things. And it's, I mentioned to somebody at the dog park, they were talking about books they were reading or something, and I said, well, I like to read these old books and old biographies. And I said, and I'm finding, and she sort of looked like, oh, that's odd, And I said, well, I'm finding that their lives aren't much different from ours, and ours aren't that much different from theirs. That the same types of things, it just cycles over, just different time, different century, different outer appearances, different modalities, but the same evils happen, the same good happens, but increasingly we seem to degrade, though, as we go on. With the percentages of good dwindling more to the percentages of evil growing. So anyway, so she did go back with her uncle, and they lived there. I've hardly looked at my notes here. Abraham lived 50 years as a hermit, and then in that one cell, went out the 2 times, and I think he lived another 10 years after, so I think a total of 60 years. So he was well in his 80s or older when he died, probably close to 90, because he was a young man when he became a hermit. And she lived 5 years longer than him. Probably the hard life she lived, those 5 years that she was a harlot, and the shock that she went through. But she lived 5 years longer than her uncle, and her last years that she lived, so she was 25, let's see, 10 years, so that would be 15. She spent as much praying as she did weeping, crying. She couldn't, it was hard for her to, the repentance that she did. So people were drawn to Mary. Lots of people came just to see Mary in her, and she took the inner cell. When they went back, she agreed to take the inner cell and be walled in, except for one little opening, and for her own protection. She did not want anything more to happen, and her uncle didn't either. He took the outer cell, and he continued living as he had always lived, in a life of extreme holiness, asceticism. And it was said of him that he lived his life, in those last 15 years especially, as if each day was the last day he was going to be alive. And I've thought of that for me because, this past winter, when it was looking like I had multiple myeloma, and, would have until maybe Thanksgiving or Christmas to live. And I was so excited and eager, because, I admit it, to get out of the physical pain is one of the big reasons. And the other, of course, was to be with Jesus. I was remembering my death experience and being with God, and my mystical marriage, and I couldn't wait, to be with Jesus, to be with my mystical spouse. But then it ended up being this MGUS, this false reading of multiple myeloma, this precursor to it. So, but at the time I thought, if I could live my life like I was living it then. I was jubilant with the joy of eagerness to see Christ, but I was also very intent on figuring out what it was that I needed to do for God, and what 8 months or 9 months I was going to have left to live. And but since then, Well, I had this terrible dark night of the senses, and I've never been so low. And I now know it was a dark night because 2 days ago it started and yesterday it was completed, just lifted right out of it. And that doesn't happen if you have depression. That doesn't happen if it's a cursing or if you're, demonically oppressed. You could still be demonically oppressed, have many bad things, but I don't think you would come out of a situation that dark that I was in. I was very low, very, very low, as in not wanting to live low, not wanting to go on, feeling like I couldn't, feeling like the darkness was so deep that I would never come out of it. So that's a dark night of the spirit, of the senses. Dark night of the spirit, I'm told, is even worse, far worse. I don't think I was in a dark night of the spirit. And sometimes they last longer, and sometimes, though God takes the soul through short little chunks of dark nights. So, like one of our viewers had one that went on for over 2 years. That's more the typical dark night. It's a horrible ordeal. And I'm even wondering if his was a dark night of the spirit, probably. One of the more extreme, that he was very holy already, and God knew he would sustain that and was ready for that. Whereas me, no, I have had these little short, I'm sure they're dark night of the senses. And probably I've been through the active, and this is probably the passive. They go in gradations of types. I'll talk about that another time. But anyway, Mary, she wept copiously, and also, though, lived the virtues and was so extremely zealous with her repentance, but also her love of God, that people were drawn to her and would come out and want her counsel and want to even just have a moment to speak to her or hear. They would usually go up and say, "Give me a word." They want a word of something holy, something from God. They wanted a word from God because they knew Mary was so close to God, and also Abraham too. But so anyway, Abraham lived his life as if he had each day was his last. And I'm going to pray and ask God for that grace for myself. And I do understand if you have since I was having a dark night of the senses, as it turned out, that, God wasn't going to let me feel any consolations during that time period, because there's a reason for having that darkness. It's to strengthen you and to draw you even closer. Because once you get through something like that, once you get through it, you realize, God lets you know you can, that you relied on God and he brought you through. So anyway, that's Mary and her uncle Abraham. And let's see if there was something else I wanted to say about them. The author concludes this whole story by comparing himself to Abraham and Mary. Ephraim the writer, by putting himself down, by pointing out all the ways that he was not like them and how far low he was, out of humility also, but a genuine humility, that after he had written this account and was also writing the account of Abraham's life, Saint Abraham, these two saints, that he felt he wasn't even worthy to have been the person to write about them. So he spent the last chapter talking about how he was unworthy. And he made this statement, I mourn for the days of my negligence, for I have not any excuse to offer. And I can relate with that. Maybe some of you can who are older, but I can relate. I feel as if I have squandered much of my life, particularly these last 5 years, or 3 of the 5 anyway. I went into a deep slump about 2 years ago. Part of it was I didn't realize the thyroid had gone and I was exhausted, but it was a spiritual slump also. And I just started to distract myself in any way possible. Just like waiting, thinking, I don't care. I'm sorry, Jesus. I'm giving up. I'm just waiting until I die. And then I'll go through purgatory forever if you need. But I had nothing left in me to read holy books or to do much praying. I could do short, pray for someone when I was asked to pray for someone, but I really had went through a spiritual death of some sort. And I don't think it was a good one. It was a squandering. I had given up. Like Dante had in his, I think it was in the Inferno, all hope abandon ye who enter here. I felt like I just lost all spiritual zeal. And actually doing these videos has brought so much back. You all have the comments and what people are doing, and I've gained back the zeal. I like doing these, and it gives me a reason to share these great saints. So let's ask this Saint Mary of Edessa, to please heal this woman, this young woman who was raped by 2 police. And this is my prayer right now. I'm just speaking it to the Lord. And you pray too, please, anyone who watches this, for this woman. I don't even know her name. I just know of her. And I probably could remember her name. It's my head injury, but maybe I was told her first name, but I don't think so. But she's lost her closeness with Christ, and has been drifted off or drawn off into some other type of deity worship or interest, intrigue, probably not worship, but intrigued by other. And because of the trauma she went through, you can imagine you'd lose your faith. It's a wonder Mary of Edessa didn't. It was a monk who raped her, who seduced her enough to get her out and to trust him, to be with him, to go someplace with him. Who knows what he told her they were going to go do? Maybe go pray in a church or something. He knew she was very holy. Evil to do that to her. And sick. And we hear about that. We know that happens. Still today, that type of thing happens with authority figures and holy figures that we trust, our parents even, or uncles or grandparents. So let's pray, asking Saint Mary of Edessa to intercede, to pray for this young woman, and to bring miracles. Ask God for miracles to help her come back to Christ, Christianity, but most of all, not most of all, that's a lot there. That's most, but in addition, to be healed of the trauma of what happened to her. Just horrific. God bless His real presence in us, and thanks for praying. We'll pray for all people who have been raped or seduced, taken advantage of, by those that we are supposed to be able to trust. And pray for people in positions of trust to keep the devil and temptation far from them, so that they remain holy and pure to their level of trust and responsibility that they've been given.